My family spent $2,300 on my sister's kids and gave my 8-year-old a drugstore bag. It sounds absurd, I know, like something you'd hear on a daytime talk show, a punchline to a bad joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was Christmas, 2019, and the air in my parents' sprawling colonial in Greenwich was thick with the usual holiday perfume: pine needles, cinnamon, and the faint cloying scent of manufactured cheer. My parents, always the arbiters of what constituted proper celebration, had decreed that this year the budget for gifts would be tight. A recession was always looming, they'd murmur, so restraint was key. Except, of course, for their golden child, my sister Claire, and her two perfect little angels, Sophia and Liam. They were the sun around which my parents' universe revolved. My son, however, Leo, was an afterthought. Always. I'd arrived with Leo clutching his hand, a slight tremor in his fingers betraying his excitement. He's 8, and Christmas morning, even after all these years, is still a kind of sacred ritual for him. He'd spent weeks drawing pictures for Santa, meticulous crayon renderings of the Lego space station he'd been dreaming of. I'd tried to manage his expectations, reminding him that Santa brought what he thought was best, but Leo had an innate, height-breaking optimism that was impossible to completely tamp down. He believed, and because he believed, I wanted to believe too, just for him. The scene unfolded in the living room, a cavernous space dominated by a towering fir tree, its branches laden with generations of ornaments, each one a fragile gilded memory. Claire and her kids were already there, perched on the edge of the plush leather sofa like royalty. Sophia, 10, had a glittering new tablet already in her lap, her thumbs flying across the screen. Liam, 7, was unwrapping something enormous, the sound of tearing paper almost deafening. My parents watched them, their faces soft with that indulgent, almost vacant adoration they reserved for Claire's children. Then it was our turn. My dad, his usual gruff demeanor softening just a hair, gestured vaguely towards the pile. "All right, Annie, you and Leo." His voice was flat, devoid of any genuine anticipation. I knelt beside Leo, my stomach tightening. There were 2 boxes, a little smaller than I'd hoped, and then a crumpled plastic bag. Not a gift bag, a grocery bag. The kind you get at CVS or Walgreens for toothpaste and shampoo. It was white, emblazoned with the store's logo, and looked utterly pathetic sitting next to the shimmering boxes. Inside, I could see a couple of paperback books, some colored pencils, and a small stuffed dog. Leo, bless him, tried to smile. He reached for the bag, his small hand fumbling with the handles. "What's this, Mom?" Sophia piped up, not even looking up from her tablet. Her voice dripped with the casual cruelty of a child who's never known anything but effortless privilege.
Claire, ever the picture of manufactured grace, offered a tight-lipped smile. "Oh, that's for Leo, honey. Just some little things." My dad cleared his throat. "Yes, well, Annie, we're all trying to be a bit more sensible this year. You understand." He didn't look at me. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on the opulent chaos unfolding with Claire's children. I forced a smile. "Of course, Dad, we're very grateful." My voice felt like sandpaper. I looked down at Leo. He was already pulling out the stuffed dog, a floppy-eared terrier with button eyes. He hugged it to his chest, his small shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. The books were a second-hand copy of Holes and a dog-eared guide to drawing cartoon characters. The pencils were a pack of 8, the kind you buy in bulk. It was a collection of drugstore discards. Then Claire's gifts came into view. A sleek, top-of-the-line gaming console for Liam, still in its pristine box. A designer backpack for Sophia, the kind that costs hundreds of dollars. And then there were the other presents, the ones for my parents to Sophia and Liam, piled high. A drone, a remote-controlled race car, several elaborate Lego sets, each one easily topping $100. I saw my mom beaming as Claire opened them, cooing over each one. Later, after the initial frenzy had died down and Claire's kids were sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a glittering mountain of expensive toys, my mom called me over. Claire was regaling my parents with tales of Sophia's latest academic achievement, her voice a bright, chirpy melody that grated on my nerves. "Annie, honey," my mom began, her tone overly sweet. "Claire was just telling us how much Sophia and Liam are loving those new coding camps. They're quite expensive, you know, but so important for their futures. And Liam's new soccer cleats, the professional ones, those were a fortune. We wanted to contribute, of course." She smiled, a little too widely. "We just thought, with Leo, he's so good with books, and those pencils will be perfect for his drawing, won't they?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to snatch the grocery bag and throw it at her. But I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I knew the truth. I always knew the truth. Claire's kids got the best of everything. Always. Their tuition at the exclusive private school they attended was astronomical. Their summer vacations involved private villas and personal chefs. And my parents, bless their wealthy, self-absorbed hearts, subsidized it all, generously. I remembered a conversation I'd overheard a few months prior, my parents discussing Claire's financial planning. My dad had been on the phone, his voice low, urgent. "Don't worry about the tuition this semester, Claire. I've wired the funds. Just make sure Sophia's private tutor is top-notch. And those trips abroad they're planning, consider it done."
The numbers he'd mentioned, casually, as if discussing the grocery bill, were staggering. Easily 5 figures, and that was just for one semester, one trip. I'd confronted my mother about it later, carefully, tentatively. "Mom, I heard you and Dad talking about Claire's finances. Are they struggling?" She'd waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet glinting. "Struggling? Heavens no, Annie. Claire's just investing in her children. It's important to give them every advantage. You know how competitive things are. We're happy to help. It's our legacy, after all." Legacy. My legacy was a grocery bag filled with discount school supplies. The $2,300 wasn't a literal figure I'd seen on a receipt that day, but it was a number I'd pieced together over weeks of whispered conversations, coded emails between my parents and Claire's husband about joint investments, and the sheer astronomical cost of the items I'd seen her children receive. The gaming console alone was nearly $500. The professional soccer cleats were well over $200. The coding camps, which I knew from discreet inquiries to friends with kids in similar programs, ran thousands per session. And that was just a fraction. My sister's children were being funded extravagantly, while my son, my bright, eager Leo, got the scraps. That day, amidst the tinsel and the forced smiles, something in me shifted. The familiar sting of being overlooked, the constant ache of being the lesser daughter, the less successful one, it coalesced into something harder, something colder. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was a quiet, simmering fury. I watched Leo, his face illuminated by the glow of his new, to him, books, and saw not a child who had received inadequate gifts, but a child who had been deliberately, subtly rendered invisible. My parents, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that Claire's children were worthy of their boundless resources, their unwavering support, their very best. And Leo? Leo was to be placated with the consolation prizes of a forgotten child. The silence in the car ride home was heavy, punctuated only by Leo's soft humming as he flipped through his drawing guide. I glanced at him, his small face peaceful, oblivious to the tempest raging inside me. He didn't understand the economics of his family, the unspoken hierarchy that placed him firmly at the bottom. He just saw a dad who'd forgotten to put his wish list in the mail, a mom who always seemed to be apologizing for something. "Did you have a good Christmas, sweetie?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He looked up, his eyes bright. "Yeah, Mom, the doggy is really soft, and I can learn to draw a rocket ship." He held up the book, his optimism a fragile, beautiful thing. And that's when the plan began to form. Not a conscious, deliberate strategy, not yet. More like a seed planted in the rich soil of my humiliation. I saw my parents, their faces etched with self-satisfaction, truly believing they'd handled Christmas with sensible restraint. I saw Claire, her perfect life seemingly without a financial care in the world, accepting their largesse with a grace that was more entitlement than gratitude. And I saw Leo, my wonderful, innocent Leo, receiving a drugstore bag while his cousins were showered with the world. The injustice of it, the sheer, blatant favoritism, burned. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the message it sent. It was about the cold, calculated devaluation of one child over another. It was about the legacy my parents were building, a legacy of exclusion and quiet abandonment. As we pulled into our own driveway, the porch light casting a warm, welcoming glow, I felt a profound sense of detachment from the life I'd been living, the life where I accepted my place, where I swallowed my pride, where I let my family dictate my worth. That life was over. Leo deserved more. He deserved to be seen, and I would make sure he was. The quiet fury inside me began to solidify, hardening into a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. They had underestimated me. They had dismissed Leo, and they would regret it. The seed of revenge had been sown. Now I just had to nurture it. The long game, I realized, was about to begin. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of power, a dangerous, exhilarating power. I spent the next few weeks in a fog, a strange kind of numb efficiency. Christmas faded, the lingering scent of pine and regret replaced by the everyday hum of our lives. Leo, bless his heart, seemed to have forgotten the disparity, diving headfirst into his drawing book and the well-loved paperbacks. He'd spend hours on the living room floor, crayons scattered, his tongue poking out in concentration as he sketched rocket ships and goofy-looking dogs. It was a small comfort, but it was mine. I'd watch him, my heart a leaden weight, the memory of that white CVS bag a constant sharp barb. My parents called, as they always did, a week after the holiday. It was my mother, her voice dripping with that saccharine concern that always made my teeth ache. "Annie, darling, just checking in. Did Leo enjoy his gifts? We were so glad we could get him those lovely books and pencils. Such creative things, so good for a developing mind." I'd smiled, a tight, brittle thing. "He loves them, Mom. He's already filled half the drawing book." The lie tasted like ash. "Oh, that's wonderful," she chirped. And Claire was telling us how thrilled Sophia and Liam were with their new gaming console and those incredible Lego sets. Such joy. It really makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it? Worthwhile, I echoed, the worth hollow. Absolutely. It wasn't just the gifts, though. That was just the most blatant, undeniable symptom of a deeper rot. It was the constant, subtle discounting of my life, my achievements, my family. My job as a paralegal at a mid-tier law firm was always met with a polite nod, a fleeting lack of interest. Claire's career as a freelance interior designer, which seemed to consist primarily of decorating her friends' already opulent homes and attending lavish luncheons, was always framed as a sophisticated, high-powered profession. When I mentioned a complex case I was working on, a genuine professional challenge, my father would usually interrupt with a story about Claire's latest client or ask if I'd seen the new renovations at the club. The house itself, that grand Greenwich estate, was a physical manifestation of their values. Every surface gleamed, every antique was perfectly placed, every piece of art meticulously chosen. It was a monument to status, to wealth accumulated and flaunted, and a stark contrast to the modest, comfortable home I shared with Leo. I'd always felt a flicker of insecurity walking through those rooms, a sense of not quite belonging, of being the less polished, less successful daughter. But now, it wasn't just insecurity, it was a burning resentment. I started digging, not in a dramatic cloak and dagger way at first. It began with casual inquiries, with paying closer attention to conversations, with noticing patterns. I remembered my parents' pronouncements about the recession looming, the need for sensible restraint. It was a narrative they spun, a justification for their selective generosity. But their definition of sensible seemed to apply only to me and Leo. I recalled a conversation from last year, a hushed discussion between my father and Claire's husband Mark about quarterly projections and liquidity. I'd brushed it off at the time, assuming it was business jargon I didn't understand. But now, it gnawed at me. What projections? What liquidity? Claire, as far as I knew, barely managed her own finances, relying on my parents for significant support. I started reviewing my parents' annual financial statements, which they'd always been surprisingly open about sharing, as if to underscore their success and subtly remind me of my own perceived shortcomings. They were extensive, detailed documents, filled with stock portfolios, real estate holdings, and investment trusts. I spent hours poring over them, looking for anything that seemed unusual, anything that might explain the vast sums apparently being funneled towards Claire. It was a slow, painstaking process. I learned the language of trusts and offshore accounts, of capital gains and dividend yields. I saw large sums consistently allocated to family support or discretionary family expenditures, always with Claire's initials or coded references to her children's expenses nearby. But the truly illuminating discovery came when I stumbled upon a separate set of documents, tucked away in a rarely accessed section of my father's digital archive. These weren't the annual statements. These were related to something called the Sterling Family Trust. The Sterling Family Trust. I'd heard of it, vaguely, as a sort of nebulous family inheritance pot, something my grandmother had set up years ago. My parents always spoke of it in hushed tones, as if it were too sacred to discuss in detail. They presented it as a stable, long-term investment that would eventually benefit all their grandchildren equally. The wording of the trust documents, however, painted a different picture. My grandmother, bless her pragmatic soul, had been a shrewd businesswoman. She'd understood the importance of equity, of ensuring her legacy was distributed fairly. The trust was indeed intended for all grandchildren, but it stipulated that distributions were to be made based on demonstrated need and future potential, with specific provisions for educational expenses and major life event support. Crucially, it also contained a clause that allowed for a discretionary fund, managed by the trustees, to be used for asset protection and strategic investment for long-term family growth. My parents were the primary trustees, and their interpretation of asset protection and strategic investment was, to put it mildly, a twisted perversion of my grandmother's intent. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 5 years alone, the Sterling Family Trust had dispersed over $500,000, not in equal installments to all grandchildren, but in a series of substantial recurring payments directed almost exclusively to Claire and Mark. The stated purposes were vague: educational funding for children who attended schools far more expensive than any of their peers, investment in entrepreneurial ventures, Claire's interior design business, which seemed to consist of her taking client deposits and then doing very little, and personal property acquisition, a vacation home they'd bought last year, a property my parents had co-signed the mortgage for. And the discretionary fund? It was a black hole of wealth, siphoned off into what appeared to be a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, all managed by a firm my father had always referred to as our very discreet advisors. There were no clear beneficiaries listed for these vast sums, just a steady stream of money flowing out, leaving a trail that led circuitously back to investments that my parents themselves seemed to benefit from. They weren't just giving Claire money, they were using the trust, my grandmother's legacy, as a personal piggy bank, a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as family support. The $2,300 from Christmas, that was a drop in the ocean, a deliberate, calculated insult designed to maintain the illusion of sensible restraint while the real wealth was being systematically redirected.
They weren't just favoring Claire, they were actively enriching her, and in doing so, they were stealing from Leo, from my future, from my grandmother's true wishes. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and cold. It wasn't just unfairness, it was elaborate, sustained fraud. They had built a fortress of lies around their wealth, and I, with my pathetic little CVS bag, had been outside, shivering in the rain. I sat there, staring at the screen, the stark figures of the trust documents laid bare. My carefully constructed world, the one where I accepted my lot with a resigned sigh, shattered. The humiliation of that Christmas morning was no longer just a personal slight. It was a symptom of a grander, more insidious betrayal. For days, I was a ghost in my own home. Leo noticed, of course. "Mom, are you okay?" he'd ask, his brow furrowed with concern. I'd force a smile, tell him I was just tired, that work was stressful. But inside, a cold, hard resolve was solidifying. The humiliation had been the catalyst. The silence had been the incubation period. And now, the discovery of the truth was the ignition. Control. They had it all. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the money. They controlled who was worthy and who was not. But they didn't control me anymore. Not with this knowledge. The first real test came a few weeks later. My parents decided to host a joint birthday celebration for Sophia and Liam. They were turning 10 and 8 respectively, milestones that demanded significant fanfare, according to my mother. The invitations arrived, embossed cardstock with gilded edges, detailing a lavish affair at a country club on the outskirts of town. There would be catered food, professional entertainment, and of course, a generous gift registry. My mother called me to discuss the details. "Annie, darling, we're so excited. It's going to be a spectacular party. Sophia and Liam deserve the very best. Now, about your gift." She paused. A little too long. "We were thinking perhaps something from their registry. They've requested a high-end trampoline for the backyard and some designer clothes. Or perhaps a contribution towards their upcoming trip to Europe." The casualness with which she suggested I contribute to another extravagant expense for Claire's children after the blatant insult of the Christmas gifts was astounding. It was a power play, a reminder of my place. "Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor that used to plague me, "I won't be able to make it to the party." Her voice sharpened. "Won't be able to make it?
Annie, what are you talking about? It's Sophia and Liam's 10th and 8th birthdays. They'll be so disappointed. I have a prior commitment, I lied smoothly. Leo has a significant chess tournament that day. It's a major event for him. We'll send our apologies and, of course, a gift, but we won't be able to attend.
There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. My mother rarely, if ever, heard the word no from me, especially when it came to family events, however minor. A chess tournament? Annie, surely you can reschedule that. This is a significant family gathering. Claire will be there. Mark will be there. Leo's chess is very important to him, I reiterated, my voice firm, and I'm committed to supporting him. We'll be there in spirit. I knew with chilling certainty that my absence would be noted, discussed, and likely interpreted as further evidence of my lack of commitment to the family. Good. Let them stew in it. The real confrontation, however, was brewing beneath the surface. I had spent days formulating a plan, meticulously outlining the steps I needed to take. It wasn't about revenge, not directly. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine and Leo's, and ensuring my grandmother's legacy was honored. It was about exposing the truth. I contacted a forensic accountant, a discreet, highly recommended professional I'd found through a colleague at the firm. I provided him with copies of the Sterling Family Trust documents, along with my parents' financial statements and any other relevant paperwork I could gather. I explained the situation, the suspected misappropriation of funds, the elaborate financial maneuvering. He listened patiently, his expression professional but attentive. "This is extensive," he'd said, his eyebrows raised as he scrolled through the documents. "Your parents have been very thorough in their efforts to obscure these transactions, but the patterns are certainly indicative of what you suspect." He explained the process, the audits, the legal challenges, the potential for unearthing a significant amount of incriminating evidence. It would be a long, arduous fight, he warned, and it would undoubtedly be messy. The thought of the inevitable fallout, the sheer disgust and rage it would unleash within my family was daunting, but the image of Leo's face, so full of innocent trust, bolstered my resolve. The first concrete move I made was subtle, a small pebble dropped into their placid lake of deception. I began documenting everything, every phone call, every email, every veiled comment from my parents or Claire about finances or gifts. I kept meticulous notes, recording dates, times, and the precise words used. I took discreet photos of documents when I visited their house, capturing glimpses of financial records that confirmed my suspicions. I knew the legal battle would require irrefutable evidence, and I was determined to build a case brick by painstaking brick. Then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. My parents decided to host their annual summer party, a sprawling affair at their estate that always attracted the family's extended network of wealthy acquaintances and business associates. It was their chance to showcase their status, their wealth, their perfect family. This year, I decided it would be their chance to showcase their hypocrisy. A week before the party, I called my mother. "Mom, I'd like to bring someone to the summer party this year. My friend David. He's a lawyer, a partner at a firm downtown. He's very interested in philanthropy and estate planning, and I thought he might enjoy meeting you and Dad." I knew my parents prided themselves on their social connections and their perceived generosity. Inviting a lawyer, especially one from a reputable firm, would appeal to their sense of status. My mother, after a moment of surprised silence, readily agreed. "Oh, how lovely, Annie. We'd be delighted to meet him. Make sure he understands how important family legacy is to us." David wasn't just any lawyer. He was a senior partner in the complex litigation department, specializing in cases involving trusts and estates, precisely the kind of expertise I needed. He was discreet, sharp, and deeply empathetic to my situation. He agreed to come not as a date, but as an observer, a silent witness, armed with a discreet recorder and a keen legal eye. He understood the stakes. The day of the party arrived, a sweltering August afternoon. The sprawling lawns of my parents' estate were dotted with guests, impeccably dressed, their laughter and chatter a dull roar. Claire and Mark were there, of course, looking their usual polished selves, their children trailing behind them, already spoiled by the abundant candy buffet. My parents, flushed with success, circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations, their smiles fixed. David and I arrived, and I introduced him, the words feeling oddly rehearsed. My parents greeted him with surprising warmth, eager to impress him with their supposed financial acumen and their commitment to philanthropic endeavors. They spent a good 20 minutes extolling the virtues of the Sterling Family Trust,
detailing their vision for ensuring the future prosperity of their grandchildren. "It's truly remarkable," David murmured, his eyes flicking towards me with a knowing glance, as my father explained how they'd strategically reinvested the trust's assets to maximize long-term growth. My father beamed, oblivious. The moment I'd been building towards arrived as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. My parents, in their usual fashion, stood on the terrace, making a brief toast to family and fortune. My father, holding his champagne flute aloft, spoke of their commitment to responsible stewardship and the importance of laying a strong financial foundation for future generations. As he spoke, I caught David's eye. He gave me a subtle nod. It was time. "Actually, Dad," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the polite applause, amplified by the outdoor sound system. My parents froze, their smiles faltering. The crowd hushed, turning their attention to me. "I think there's something important we should all be discussing."
Something about that strong financial foundation. My father's face hardened. "Annie, this is hardly the time or place." "Oh, I disagree, Dad," I said, stepping forward, David a silent, formidable presence beside me. "It's the perfect time, especially when we're talking about the Sterling Family Trust. You and Mom have been such diligent stewards of that trust, haven't you? Making sure it's used for the strategic investment and asset protection of the family." I let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Claire scoffed, a brittle sound. "Annie, what are you talking about? You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I, Claire?" I turned to face her, my gaze unwavering. "Because I've been doing some research, some very thorough research. It turns out that the strategic investments you and Mom have been making with the Sterling Family Trust Funds are quite fascinating, especially the amounts directed towards entrepreneurial ventures and educational funding for your children. Amounts that seem to far exceed any reasonable justification and which frankly seem to have been systematically funneled into your personal accounts and acquisitions." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. My parents' faces had gone from annoyance to a sickly pale. My mother clutched her pearls, her eyes wide with panic. My father's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white on his champagne flute. "This is slander, Annie," he boomed, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know more than you think, Dad," I countered, my voice quiet but carrying an unnerving authority. "I know about the shell corporations. I know about the offshore accounts. I know that the discretionary fund you've been using to hide these assets has been systematically depleted, all while Leo, your other grandchild, receives the kind of support that fits in a CVS bag. I know that my grandmother's legacy, a legacy meant for all of us, has been plundered and twisted into a private slush fund for Claire and her family." The shocked silence that followed was deafening. Faces turned towards my parents, expressions shifting from polite interest to dawning horror and disapproval. Claire looked utterly blindsided, her perfect facade cracking. Mark's face was a mask of grim recognition. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. "Annie, how could you? You're ruining everything." "You ruined it, Mom," I said, my voice softening with a profound sadness that belied the fury burning within me. "You and Dad, you chose. You made your choices years ago, and the consequences are finally catching up. David here," I gestured to him, "is a specialist in trust litigation. He's been kind enough to review the documents I've provided him, and he agrees. There's a very clear pattern of misappropriation, a very clear breach of fiduciary duty." David offered a polite, tight smile to the stunned crowd. "Indeed," he said, his voice smooth and professional.
"The evidence, as presented, suggests a significant deviation from the trust's intended purpose. Such matters are often complex, but ultimately the truth tends to surface." The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Guests began to discreetly edge away from my parents, their smiles replaced by concerned frowns. The carefully constructed image of my parents as benevolent patrons of the arts and family financiers was crumbling before their very eyes. My father finally snapped. He lunged towards me, his face contorted with fury. "You ungrateful little—" David stepped forward, blocking his path. "Mr. Sterling, I'd advise you to refrain from any further hostile actions. We are prepared to take this matter to the appropriate authorities." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. My father recoiled as if struck, his chest heaving. My mother was openly weeping now, a pathetic, keening sound. Claire, white-faced, stood frozen, her gaze fixed on me with a mixture of disbelief and dawning terror. I looked at my parents, at their carefully cultivated world collapsing around them. I looked at Claire, her privileged existence suddenly under a very bright, very unwelcome spotlight. And I looked at the faces of the guests, their hushed whispers turning into urgent conversations. The foundation of their world, the illusion of their impeccable integrity, had been irrevocably shattered. The silence that descended wasn't one of shock anymore. It was the chilling, heavy silence of reckoning. I had exposed them, and in doing so, I had finally, irrevocably taken my power back. But as I stood there, the architect of their downfall, a profound emptiness settled in my chest. This was only the beginning. The real fight, the battle for justice and for Leo's future, had just begun. The cliffhanger wasn't just for them, it was for me too. What would become of us all? The silence that followed wasn't a void. It was a roiling sea of unspoken words, of gazes that shifted from confusion to cold judgment. The polite chatter that had filled the air moments before had evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension that vibrated with the unspoken. My parents stood frozen, their faces etched with a dawning, absolute horror, like statues carved from fear. My mother's pearl necklace, a symbol of their curated wealth, seemed to gleam mockingly in the fading light. Claire, usually so composed, looked like a deer caught in headlights, her perfectly styled hair suddenly appearing disheveled, her expression raw with a dawning panic. Mark, ever the pragmatist, had the grim look of a man who'd just watched his financial stability evaporating in real time. I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of it, the suffocating realization dawning on every face that mattered. David stood beside me, a quiet, unwavering pillar of support, his presence a subtle yet potent declaration of intent. He had seen it all before, this unraveling of carefully constructed lies.
He knew the smell of desperation, the scent of rot beneath polished veneer. My father finally broke the spell, his voice a gravelly rasp that held none of his former booming authority. "Annie, what have you done?" The question wasn't an inquiry, it was a desperate plea, a recognition of the precipice they now teetered upon. I met his gaze, my own steady, devoid of the trembling insecurity that had defined me for so long. "I've done what needed to be done, Dad. I've brought the truth to light. I've ensured my grandmother's wishes, her legacy, are no longer a tool for your personal enrichment." The words were calm, measured, but they carried the force of a tectonic shift. I could feel the eyes of the assembled guests, the old friends and business associates, now dissecting my parents, their judgments sharp and immediate. The careful tapestry of their reputation, woven over decades of calculated displays of affluence and generosity, was in tatters. My mother, recovering slightly from her shock, managed a tremulous, pleading tone. "Annie, darling, please, this is a misunderstanding. Your father and I, we have always acted in the best interests of the family." I felt a pang, a fleeting, bitter echo of the daughter who had yearned for their approval, for a single shred of genuine validation, but it was quickly swallowed by the cold certainty of their betrayal. Best interests? Mom, you and Dad systematically diverted funds from a trust established for all grandchildren, funds that are his educational needs, his life events. Instead, you've used it to finance Claire's lifestyle, her children's every whim, and God knows what else through those offshore accounts. That $2,300 Christmas gift wasn't just insulting, it was a cruel mockery, a deliberate flaunting of your wealth while you systematically starved my son of his rightful inheritance. The mention of the Christmas gift, so insignificant in the grand scheme of the millions being discussed, seemed to crystallize the injustice for many. I saw a few heads nod in understanding, a few pairs of eyes widen further. The carefully curated image of benevolent philanthropists had been exposed as a lie, a sophisticated scam built on the backs of their own family. Claire finally found her voice, a desperate, high-pitched wail. "This is a fabrication. Annie is lying. She's always been jealous." She turned to the crowd, her voice cracking. "My parents have done everything for me, yes, because they are generous. And Annie has always been resentful because she never had what I have." "Resentful?" I echoed, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "Oh, Claire, I was resentful because you were favored. But now I'm just incensed. This isn't about jealousy. This is about theft. This is about fraud. And this," I turned to David, my voice softening, but the intent remaining steely, "is about accountability."
David cleared his throat, addressing the hushed crowd with quiet authority. For those of you who are unaware, my name is David Chen, and I am a partner at Sterling & Croft, specializing in trust and estate litigation. My client, Miss Annie Sterling, has provided me with extensive documentation regarding the Sterling Family Trust. The evidence strongly suggests a pattern of gross mismanagement, misappropriation of funds, and a significant breach of fiduciary duty by the current trustees, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. We are currently in the process of preparing formal legal proceedings to address these irregularities. The name of his firm, a prestigious one that I knew commanded respect, sent a fresh wave of shock through the assembled guests. My parents' faces contorted with disbelief, then with a dawning, abject terror. They had underestimated me. They had never truly believed I would fight back, that I possessed the will or the means to challenge them on their own terms. My father sputtered, his face a blotchy red. You can't. This is our family. You will not drag our name through the mud." "You already dragged our name through the mud, Dad," I said, my voice firm. "You did it with every dollar you siphoned, every lie you told, every time you made me feel less than because my life wasn't as impressive as Claire's. This is about justice. It's about Leo's future. It's about honoring my grandmother's true intentions." The crowd began to disperse, not with their usual polite farewells, but with hurried excuses and sidelong glances. The glamour and festivity of the party had curdled into an ugly spectacle. The whispers that followed them were no longer about the latest stock market trends or summer vacation plans, but about the shocking revelations unfolding on the manicured lawn. Claire, seeing the tide of public opinion turning irrevocably against her parents, began to look genuinely panicked. She tried to approach her father, her voice pleading, "Dad, we have to do something. We have to fix this." But her father, his face a mask of defeated rage, ignored her. He simply stood there, a man undone, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. My mother, sobbing uncontrollably, leaned heavily on a garden statue, her face buried in her hands. I looked at them, at the ruins of their ambition and their deceit. There was no triumph, no vindication in the way I had imagined, just a profound, weary sadness. I had won. I had exposed them. I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine and Leo's. But the cost was the destruction of what little family remained. "We're leaving," I said to David, my voice raspy. The energy that had fueled me for weeks was finally draining away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The adrenaline was fading, and the enormity of what had just transpired began to settle. As we walked away, I cast one last glance back.
My parents stood amidst the wreckage of their party, their perfect lives laid bare for all to see. Claire was arguing with Mark, her voice a desperate, shrill sound that was quickly lost to the rustling leaves. The estate, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a gilded cage that had finally sprung open, releasing its prisoners and exposing its rot. We drove away in silence. The city lights blurred past the windows, each one a fleeting reminder of the life I was building, the life I was fighting for. Leo would never have to know the details of this day, the ugliness that had festered beneath the surface of his grandparents' seemingly perfect existence. He would only know that his mother had fought for him, had protected him. I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine idling softly. I looked at my hands, still steady, still capable. The fight hadn't ended with the party. It had merely entered a new, more arduous phase. The legal battle would be brutal, protracted. There would be more accusations, more attempts to discredit me. But I was no longer the naive, overlooked daughter. I was Annie Sterling, and I had the truth on my side. And I had the unwavering, unyielding love for my son, Leo, as my shield and my sword. This was my life now, the life I had forged from the ashes of their deception. It wasn't the life I had dreamed of, but it was real, it was mine, and it was built on a foundation of unshakable truth. The exhale that escaped my lips was long, deep, and carried the quiet, resolute certainty of a warrior who had just won a war, knowing the peace that followed was hard-earned and fiercely protected.